Welcome. My name is Kristine Shipman, and I am an executive leadership coach at the San Diego County Office of Education. I am also a leadership coach in general, a small business owner. I am a mom, a partner, and I am a student in higher education. Today, we are going to be talking about speaking up and standing firm, and really talking about gender oppression and how it shows up in our careers and in higher education. Uh, my style, as you will get to know me very quickly, is one of personal experience and storytelling. I'll weave in data and statistics as I can, but really, this session is about one woman's personal experience with overcoming gender oppression and learning to not just speak up, but to stand firm when all of the odds are against you, um, when speaking of gender oppression. So I'll give you a little bit of my background. I grew up in a small town in Central California. My parents are in a biracial marriage. They have been married almost 50 years, but I grew up with a feeling of otherness, not only as being a female, but as being a female that is an ethnic minority, being of Latinx descent. In my little town, there were not a lot of little girls that looked like me. Um, and those that were classified, due to us being in an agriculture town, as being children of farm workers, which we were treated differently. And so that was my lived experience in walking through school. And I found myself from a very early age really thriving and achieving. And yet, as I progressed through elementary school, I would typically be called things like teacher's pet, because I did seek um, the affirmation from my teachers, and really did want to excel, and really did want to realize that I was doing a good job, and that I guess the bigger picture is that I fit in. And that's something that I carried with me through my elementary school experience. It's interesting to me how so many women face gender oppression or discriminatory types of actions at such a young age. I was on Facebook, the very scientifically based Facebook, and I was reading a post from a friend recently that was asking the question of our earliest memories of any type of discriminatory or gender oppressed types of behavior that were levied against us. And so I reflected on that, and I remember in seventh grade, I was struggling in science. I had conditioned myself to believe I was not the science girl. And I just really couldn't wrap my head around some of the concepts. And I was staying after class trying to seek help from the teacher. And grades came time. It came time for report cards to come out. And my teacher, a white male teacher, asked to meet with my mother. So I remember being super nervous because my mom was going to meet with all of my teachers, just at the end of the quarter, and just typical student-teacher conferences. I remember sitting in this room. It was a very big classroom. It was all laboratory style, and stools, black countertops. I can still remember the smells, and I remember that this teacher directed my mom and I to sit in the stools while he stood near us. And my mother is in the medical field and from the science background. And so she was asking specific questions because she knew that I was struggling with some of the content. And I remember her saying, "What's it going to take for my daughter to find success in your class?" And this teacher looked at my mom and said, "Well, your daughter is not an A student. But if you were to come to me crying, saying my baby girl isn't going to be successful in your class and she's going to fail middle school unless you give her an A, then I'll consider it." And that moment has stuck with me for almost 20 years as I step back and I look at the impact of gender oppressed type of behavior, aggressive types of behavior by men in power towards women and young women at a formative age, and how that can impact us. And right then was like the origin of the story of me feeling as an imposter in my own life. And so I carried that with me. I carried that with me through high school, trying to strive through high school. And, what was very interesting to me is I was doing all of this while still achieving very high grades and high marks and getting recognized for my academics. But for some reason, I felt as a young woman of an ethnic minority background that I just didn't fit in. And different experiences from educators along the way led me to believe that. Now, this is not a teacher bashing session, because what did I end up doing with my life? Well, once I graduated from high school and I was soul searching on what I wanted to do, I wanted to focus on ensuring that no student had an experience like me. So I went into the very noble profession of teaching, and I found myself to be very successful in it. I excelled. I was, in my second year of teaching, named the department chair of my department. And I remember leading my first department chair meeting as a 23-year-old in a group of individuals that were much older than me. And one of the male teachers that was very veteran pulled me aside at the end, and he said, "Who do you think you are leading this group? You don't know anything. And I'm not going to listen to you. This isn't new. You're going to be gone, and it's going to go back to status as normal." And I paused for a moment in that moment, and I just asked myself, what is it that I want to be my legacy? And so I decided for the first time to speak truth to power. And I said to that teacher, that male teacher, I said, while I hear what you're saying, I'm not going anywhere. And our students deserve better. So I'm going to keep leading this group. And it's my sincerest hope that you're going to continue to show up. And that at the end of this, we're going to create something really beautiful that changes things for kids. And for the first time, I saw this man pause in his footsteps. And he said, well, you're going to have to walk it out, and we'll see. I'd like to say that that's one of my great success stories of my career, that this gentleman actually ended up becoming one of my closest friends over the course of my career, and it changed his teaching practice. But what it required of me is speaking truth to power in a way that could be heard. And that didn't mean shifting who I was as an individual, but what it did mean was understanding the context, speaking to him, and then standing firm. I think that sometimes as women, we like to speak up in incidental occurrences of injustice. And what I have learned over time is that this is not a soundbite type of battle. We do not get to just speak our truth and then walk away. I'd like to say that that was my last experience of confronting gender oppression in the workplace, but it's not. As a young Latina woman in a profession that is dominated by individuals that are much senior to me, I've experienced promotion at a much more rapid rate. I was in the classroom for a couple of years, then I was tapped on the shoulder to move into a site leadership position. I was then, shortly after, due to that success, asked to go to a school that was on the verge of state takeover and help with a school turnaround. And again, I faced gender oppressive types of behavior. I was frequently asked about my age, asked if I actually had a teaching credential. People wanted to know if I had the street cred, and that was the term that they used, to be able to follow me. And what it took from me is consistently walking out my mission. And my mission has been to disrupt the norm. Since a young age, I have felt a deep calling to change the tide as it relates to the experience of women as in gender oppressive types of situations. And I didn't really know what the extent of that would have been until the last 6 weeks of my life. I come to you very emotionally raw today. It's been a very difficult battle for the last couple of days. But I made a decision just about 3 years ago to really face my imposter syndrome, this feeling of I'm not good enough, and I don't belong here, by applying to a doctoral program at an elite university. And I have been enrolled in that for about 2.5 years now. I'm entering my 3rd year, the home stretch, 2 more semesters. And over the course of this experience, it has been very interesting to me how how the differing personalities play out by professors in the classroom, how we speak of diversity and equity, and the very next semester are faced with a misogynistic, male chauvinist type of professor. Now, I don't hate men. I don't want that to be the story here. But I do feel that based off of my experiences, I've become a little bit more conditioned to recognize it. Prior to applying to this university, I had made the decision, the very difficult decision about 5 years ago, to step out of an emotionally and physically abusive marriage. And in that experience, I felt so beat down that I really didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I stood for. I had become conditioned to accept that that type of hurtful and demeaning behavior was what I was worthy of. And breaking free from that, I did some deep work to be able to understand who I am in my identity, and that is as a warrior, that is as a woman, that is a fierce female. And so I stepped into this doctoral experience as a different individual, as a woman who was making the decision to directly confront imposter syndrome and to use this program to help me hone my skills in being able to speak to gender oppressive dynamics in the workplace and ultimately in higher education. But again, the last 6 weeks have really challenged that for me. I enrolled in a class earlier this semester, and immediately I knew that this was going to put me to the test. I was engaged in a class with a professor who found it very much his job to remind the women in our class that he was of superior intellect and intelligence. And I started to challenge it in subtle and nuanced ways, because that's the thing with gender oppression and power dynamics. Back in the 1950s and 1960s, the research shows that it was overt types of oppressive dynamics where women were excluded from the workplace. But as we have evolved into 2020, that gender oppressive dynamic has become very subtle and nuanced to where it is more akin to the concept of gaslighting, where a woman is made to feel as if she's crazy, as if is this really happening to me? Am I the only one? It's isolating, and it is gradual in its intensity. And that was my exact experience. This male professor began to make me doubt reality. When I started to speak up and speak truth to power, would make demeaning comments to me, but not through writing. It would be through a phone call, so that there was no trace of it. And I sat with it for weeks, and I would talk with some of my female classmates, and we would ask, are we crazy? I've had a 3.0 in this program. Am I really a fake? Maybe I need to stop. Maybe I need to, take a break from schooling, and I need to get my head together. And then I realized that it wasn't us. It was gender-based gaslighting that had started to permeate our classroom. And so then I decided to speak up. I spoke up, and I used my voice to speak against this professor. And I did it in a professional manner, but then all hell broke loose. It became that I was a horrible student, that I didn't have the expertise to back up who I really said I was. This individual went into my social media profile and looked at my background and used it against me. And at that moment, I had to make a decision, because this man went from insulting my intelligence to demonstrating that he would do whatever it takes to use his power over me until I complied. And that was when I made the decision, the very difficult decision, to stand firm and to do whatever it took to tell this man that he didn't have the right to treat me or any other woman like this. And so this was all in the midst of the intense racial dynamics that our nation was facing following the release of the George Floyd video and his tragic and unnecessary and violent death. And so I spoke up. I did not know what else to do other than to use my voice and to stand firm that behavior such as this is not acceptable towards women. And I went to the president of my university and informed her, yes, her, of what was happening. And the response came, an investigation started, and the behavior amplified, because that is what can happen when we speak up. So many of us as women have conditioned ourselves to believe that if we speak up, somebody is going to come in and they're going to act on our behalf. And I would love, love, love to believe that that is the truth. But what I've learned through this experience is that the squeaky wheel gets oiled. It takes speaking up not just once, but standing firm to ensure that follow through happens. Because what happened was that the traditional bureaucratic method of we're going to launch an investigation, the Office of Equity is involved, we need to interview more individuals. In the meanwhile, behind the scenes, this professor's behavior was amplifying. It was becoming erratic. It was becoming offensive. It was becoming a saboteur. He was becoming a saboteur to me, threatening my career at the university, my academic career at the university. And so I kept on, and I kept speaking up, and I kept standing firm, and I documented, and I took screenshots, and I provided them to this Office of Equity. I provided it to the president of the university. I provided it to the dean of the School of Education. I provided it to the associate deans, and I kept on it, and it was exhausting, and I felt like breaking, and I doubted my sanity. And then I asked myself, what am I going to say to these women at this Women's Equality Summit? Here I am facing one of the most devastating experiences in my professional career and in my academic career. And I'm supposed to speak on gender oppression in the workplace and in higher education. What am I going to say? How am I going to navigate this when I am not immune to it? And it struck me that none of us are immune to this, ladies. I think I had led myself to believe that I would achieve a certain level of qualification, a certain level of title, and suddenly power dynamics and gender oppression would dissipate, that people would see who I was and they would suddenly recognize my intellect and my contributions, and that I would no longer be deemed as a threat. But that's not the case. And so I urge each of us to really anchor into that deepest, fiercest part of our personality and who we are as we navigate leadership, because it takes us as fierce women to be able to overcome gender oppression. A couple years ago, after my divorce, and after leaving that abusive situation, I wanted to get a tattoo. I know it seems so silly, but I had wanted a tattoo for a number of years, and my former husband had told me no. And he had said, I'm not okay with it. And I had accepted that. I had accepted that a man could tell me what was and wasn't okay with my body. And that was not any fault of mine, but it was the fault of being involved in an abusive pattern of a relationship. And so one of my steps in my journey to get back up, that's what I've called it, my get back up journey, is to decide on an intentional tattoo that I would have in my life that would remind me every day of who I really am at my core. And as I left that abusive marriage, this word stood out to me on who I am. And it was the word fierce. At first, I kind of bristled at it when that came to my mind as who I am, because as women, words such as that, so words that are hard, we tend to align them with masculine types of traits of being pushy, being domineering. And then I researched the true origins of the word fierce and the true definition of it. And it says that it's to live with a heartfelt and powerful intensity. And I thought, what better mantra for my life than to say, from here on out, I want to be known as a woman who lives with heartfelt and powerful intensity. And so I did it. I did it right here. And it says, she is fierce. And it's probably backwards to you. I know that. But as I was going through this journey with this professor, as I was standing firm and speaking truth to power and surfacing injustices that were occurring to women, as I decided to not relent, a magical thing happened. Women saw my bravery. Women that were experiencing the same type of behavior from this professor spoke up. They came forward and they said, if you are being brave and courageous and putting it all on the line, I can speak up too. I didn't want to because I felt alone, but you spoke up and now I know I am not alone. And so women started to come forward. Current women that were enrolled in his classes, women that were friends of my friends that had experienced this behavior in other semesters. What ended up happening over the last 3 weeks of the investigation is a total of 12 women stepping forward and 3 men coming forward as upstanders and allies to speak to what they have observed in the treatment of women. And I stand firm. And I stood firm. And last night, I received the news that the university found all of my claims to be substantiated. And they took action. And they apologized. And I got a personal phone call from the dean of the university expressing his condolences for the trauma that I'd had to endure. And at the end of the night, I broke. Because standing firm takes energy. And it's exhausting. I know. And I know that there are some of you on here that are facing really unique gender oppressed dynamics in your profession. And sometimes it feels too heavy. Sometimes it is just so much easier for us to let it roll, to let it happen, and to just stay quiet. And it's not anything to feel ashamed of, because at the end of the day, we all have to do what is best for us. But I'm encouraging you, as you're attending this Women's Equality Summit, to consider how many other women are feeling exactly like you and are facing the same types of gender oppressed dynamics and power dynamics leveraged against them as you. And what could your voice do by not just speaking up, but standing firm for change? It could result in minimal incremental change. It could result in you continuing to stand alone. But what if, just what if you're speaking up against these gender oppressive dynamics in the workplace or in higher education result in other women feeling empowered to speak up? You see, what we don't realize is that for those of us that feel called to speak up and to stand firm, it gives permission for others to learn how to use their voice. Not every woman has come to the point of being able to face imposter syndrome head on, and that's okay. But we have the power to create the conditions for other women to be able to speak up too. I'm reminded of the Me Too movement specifically, and how in that it really was one woman speaking up that opened up the floodgates. And I remember this playing out in the media and people saying, well, why all of a sudden are so many women coming forward? It's because it's like that final crack in the dam. It's that finally getting through. It's like when one woman finally gets through to a senior level of leadership, it lets others know it's possible. Until then, sometimes we just settle for thinking that this is just my lot in life. This is what I was, this is why, this is what I have to go through because I'm a woman. We tend to believe these oppressive types of dynamics are acceptable, that maybe it's just what it's meant to be. But what happens when one of us speaks up and then continues to speak up and stand firm is that it shifts the narrative. It shifts away from a hegemonic culture, a white male hegemonic culture of leadership and dominance and power dynamics. And it takes a little bit of that power and it gives it to a woman who's then able to speak that truth to power to disrupt the norm. And so that's really what I would encourage each of you to consider, is how in your personal and professional life, you can take that one element of speaking truth to power and helping to take your power back so that it can help to restore power to other women in leadership. Thank you so much for letting me share my story and for letting me speak my truth of how standing firm has helped me to really confront my own feelings of imposter syndrome and take back my power.